to welcome you to the InitiativeOne podcast. Today is a day of transition here at InitiativeOne. I've recently transitioned out of the CEO role. My wife and my partner, who has been with me for 18 years, has assumed the new CEO role, frankly, because she's better as a leader than I am. And our company is in good hands. But as part of that transition, I'm moving into front-facing roles. And part of my new responsibilities is hosting this podcast. I want to thank Nick Nyber for the excellent job he's done in creating our podcast format. And I just want to say thank you to Nick. Now, today, I have a very special guest and a dear friend. I want to introduce to you to Damian LaCroix. Damian is the superintendent of the Howard-Suamico school system here in the Green Bay area. Damian has a unique story. He's one of the most respected state superintendents we have in Wisconsin. He personally started our education division here at InitiativeOne as a volunteer. And we are now in school districts all over the country, and it was because of the word of mouth that Damian created. And so, Damian, we're so glad that you're here, and I can't wait for you to share your pearls of wisdom with our audience. So welcome.
Thanks, Fred. Great to be here. Congratulations to you on the big decision. Obviously, congratulations to Tracy on her major transition, and excited for both of you and the future of the company.
Thank you. Damian's also on our board. So he has intricate knowledge of what we do. He's helped shape us as an organization. And so Damian, we're just going to talk. You are a rare bird in state public education. We were talking that the average tenure today among school superintendents is 2.6 years. And yet you are going on almost 18 years. Wow. So tell me about what drew you to education?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm wrapping up my 18th year, Fred, looking at year number 19. Wow. So, the crazy part of my story is I became the 5th superintendent in 6 years back in 2005 in the Howard-Suamico School District. So we're just 10 minutes northwest of Lambeau Field as a frame of reference for your listeners. We're a bedroom community to Green Bay, about 6,000 students that we serve within my district. And, becoming the 5th superintendent in 6 years was a challenge, right? I was in the district as an elementary principal. Shortly after the announcement, I remember standing in the hallway. It was late in spring. It was dark. The lights were off. And one of my parents was coming down the hallway, and he stopped short of about 10 feet of me, and he turned his head and he furrowed his brow, and in a sarcastic voice, he said to me, "Did you even think about it before you said yes?" And I didn't have the presence of mind back in 2005, but it's taken me, almost 19 years to come up with a good response to that question. And I wish I would have said in the moment, when you're called to lead, you don't think about it, you respond. The challenge, of course, was we had lost 2 referenda for a new elementary school. We were on the verge of losing a third. Our board was dysfunctional. Our staff was disillusioned, and our community, I think, was distrustful because of this rotating carousel of leadership. And I remember somebody asking me, "Well, how are you sleeping, given the context?" And I responded by saying, "Like a baby. I'm waking up every 2 hours and crying." So almost 19 years later, with some bumps and bruises to show for it in leadership, it's great to be here. I feel so blessed to have had this experience, and hopefully I can share some hope and some insights today for leaders out there, frankly, within the K-12 educational space who are hurting.
So let me ask you this question. There's a lot of superintendents of school districts that are watching this, and they're in a process of trying to create momentum in their own leadership. What were the keys when you started, especially in an environment of such strong distrust, where well, no fault of your own, you started in a hole. What were the keys that you would say to any superintendent or educational leader that's really key when you're trying to start a new experience and you have a long way to go? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and there's so much to say in response to that. But I think first and foremost, know yourself as a leader. What are the values that are near and dear to your heart and in your mind, and allow those to guide your decision-making, your planning, and your thinking. And then I think from a culture standpoint, it's really about step back and assess culture. In my particular case, I was coming from an elementary principalship into the district office, which is kind of an unconventional career path. And I knew I needed to look, listen, learn, and then lead. Even though I had been there 3 years, I think one of the biggest mistakes I could have made was to have jumped right into leadership at that point and to have started making decisions. So I spent a few months doing a lot of these types of listening sessions. I went to every school in the community. I had hundreds of listening sessions. I put out a survey, and basically I asked our team, what are the best things we're doing? What are some things we need to stop doing, start doing, and keep doing? And then what should my priorities be as leader? Even though I clearly had some insights to that, to come in on the white horse with all the answers would have been a catastrophic mistake. We needed to heal. We needed to pause. I needed to project humility and thoughtfulness in my approach. And so I slowed the roll, took the time to do a lot of looking, a lot of listening. And then I came back to our staff in the fall and I said, here's what I heard you say. Here are the top 3 things based upon the feedback you've shared with me that I believe we need to work on.
So knowing that you came in under a lot of community pressure that something had to change and change quick. I'm sure that while you were doing that, you were hearing all kinds of voices saying, you're not changing fast enough. Are you doing anything? What about all these listening sessions? We want you to get to the real work. What kept you in that discipline of doing what you knew what was the right approach, even though you had all this pressure to meet other people's expectations?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you just said a moment ago, Fred. It's discipline. It's having the discipline to respond but not react. And there's a qualitative difference between the two. Reacting is, jumping to every issue, every pressure, every complaint, every idea that comes across your path. And it's getting nibbled to death by ducks if you choose to be a reactionary leader. Responding is very different. It's being thoughtful. It's being purposeful. It's using the feedback you've been given to have the discipline to stay focused as a leader. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges in leadership right now, especially in a social media world, is not getting pulled into that vortex that takes you off path. And I routinely talk to my leadership team about leadership today is a lot like taking a transcontinental flight. These transcontinental flights are continuously being pulled off course by elements, by wind, by weather, and the onboard computer is bringing that jet back on track, back toward its intended target. And leadership is very much the same way. There are these forces that are continuously trying to pull us off target, and we need to have this onboard computer system to give us the discipline and the focus we need to stay the course. When everything around us is attempting to pull us off.
How insightful. The tendency is when you have all this external pressure is to listen to the noise. But what I'm hearing you say, when the noise is the loudest is when you need to go inside of yourself and lead from your own sense of conviction and your own sense of purpose. Yeah. So speaking of purpose, there are days that I'm sure that you have said, why am I doing this? And yet, you're going in the 19 years now, something keeps you going. What keeps you going on those days of discouragement, especially when other opportunities are being waved in front of you as a result of the good work that you've done? What keeps you in the race?
A lot of coffee. I will joke with my team sometimes that I've got too much blood in my caffeine system. So seriously, it's a calling, right? It's a sense of mission. One of the first things I did was, in working with my immediate leadership team, was to recommit to vision, values, and mission. So our mission as a school system, and everybody's got a mission, and everybody talks about a mission, but the proof is in the pudding relative to whether the leader is genuinely committed to the mission, not just through his or her words, but through his or her actions. So do you know it? And unless you know it here, you can't really show it here. So our mission states that we will, it's very declarative, we will work with families and community to ensure that our students have the knowledge and the skills to succeed in a changing world. Well, who could argue that it's a changing world, right?
Yeah.
And what are the knowledge and skills that our kids need to prepare for their future, not our past, which is a fundamental question. So it's really being mission-driven as a leader, and I know that sounds so trite, it seems so basic, everybody says that, but we've committed to that in our school system. And you know, one of my jobs, and I think I stole this idea from you, is to become the chief reminding officer. Like, over and over and over again, I need to creatively and thoughtfully and in a timely fashion look for ways to breathe life and focus and a spotlight on that mission statement, and to celebrate it when we're doing well, and to challenge both myself and our team and our community to step up when we've got gaps or deficits that aren't enabling us to live in or breathe into that mission.
So your mission and values are not a plaque on the wall for you that some consultant came in, worked with you guys over a short period of time, and you've got the nice words. It feels to me that your true mission and vision, as well as your values, it feels to me as I'm listening to you that is the guide for all of your key decisions. Am I hearing that correctly?
Absolutely. It needs to start there, and I need to find routine ways without being redundant. You know, I want to be intentionally redundant, but I don't want to be predictable as a leader, and that takes a lot of creativity. And so the big challenge is, and this is, I'm being flip as I say this, but anybody can come in and transform an organization. It takes true leadership to transform, build, and then sustain change over an extended period of time. So concluding my 18th year as superintendent, I was in the district 3 years before, so 20 plus years, like, how do you reinvent yourself, right, as a leader over an extended period of time? That's been one of my biggest challenges and one of my biggest opportunities during my tenure here.
Yeah. So you were named in 2017 as State Superintendent of the Year. How was that when you found out about it?
Well, I'm laughing because it was great to receive the award in Milwaukee in front of a full ballroom, and it was greater to be nominated by my colleagues and selected by my colleagues. So there's 421 school districts in the state of Wisconsin, so to be selected as the representative of that group when there's so many other worthy recipients was both humbling and affirming. I chuckle because a few short months later, in the month of April, we went to our community for our first operational referendum, and we failed miserably.
I remember
under
that.
my leadership.
Yes.
And so I went from the penthouse to the outhouse in a very short period of time. I think Lou Holt says one day we're drinking the wine and next day we're picking the grapes as leaders. And I can relate to that. That was very sobering. That was very humbling. Certainly, I was disappointed by that, but not defeated as a leader, right? So how do we find the wherewithal within ourselves to get up off the ground and lead in the face of what was a pretty significant disappointment at that point in time?
I remember that. I remember working with your team, and I remember walking in into that big room with all of your leaders, about 50 of your leaders, and seeing the dour faces and the sense of disappointment and the sense of failure. But we also know there is a direct relationship. We all fail. The difference is what do we do with that failure to make it work for us? You learned some really valuable lessons during that failure that have served you well since then, and will continue to serve you well as a community leader. What were those key lessons that you learned in your failure?
Well, I think it goes back to listening, and the temptation, frankly, was to come back right away with the answer, and you and others, I think, advised me that the community just gave you an answer. You proposed a solution that was not accepted. So how do you find within yourself when everything is screaming at you to figure it out quickly because you just had a major setback? We had to cut $3.5 million. We had to non-renew staff. I had to stand in front of our staff of several hundred employees and say, listen, the board gave me a charge to come up with a bold strategy, and I did in partnership with my team, and the strategy did not work. And I'm responsible. I think that's one of the things that, leaders get too much acclaim when things are going well and probably get too much blame when they're not, and you need to own the blame when things aren't going well. So that was one of the first things I determined in my mind and in my heart, that I needed to stand in front of our team. I needed to stand in front of several hundred people and own the decision and the responsibility, and then to thoughtfully talk about how we were going to move forward without having it all figured out in the moment. So that was tough. There, honestly, as a leader, there were some tears. I'm not ashamed or embarrassed to admit that throughout 18 years, I've had some tears in private where I've just shaken my head out of frustration, disappointment, rejection, and you can do that privately, and then you need to step back into the arena, so to speak, and fail forward, and that's what we were doing at the time.
It would be so easy in that moment to become what we call a volunteer victim, that the reason why this didn't work is because our community just doesn't trust us, or this community just doesn't get how important education is, and go into that blame. And yet you all didn't do that. I saw you point the finger at yourselves instead of point the finger at other people. And I think that was part of the reason why you came back with such a powerful strategy that eventually won the full-throated support of the entire community not long after.
Right. Yeah, approximately a year later, we came back actually with a bigger request to meet more needs, and it passed by high 50. So it was one of the largest turnarounds in state history in terms of the initial defeat, stepping back, regrouping, doing a lot of listening, surveying the community, having focus groups, and having the humility just to say, okay, we tried. We were wrong. I stood in front of a number of groups and made that statement. I was wrong, which is hard to say as a confident leader, but I meant it. I think the sincerity of it came through, and then correspondingly, then people were willing to say, okay, this leader is willing to listen and learn. Maybe we can support him. We came up with a different strategy, a different plan, and turned it around, and fortunately, and then we're able to move forward.
That's terrific. Let me ask you a personal question. Who have been your key influencers in your life that have really formulated much of who you are as a leader?
Yeah, I think I have to start with my parents, right? Our parents are our first and best teachers. Regardless of how good a job they did, and as a dad of 4, I now have a greater appreciation for my parents as I look at my mistakes as a parent of a 21, 23, 24, and 26-year-old. So I'm reading John Meacham's book right now on Abraham Lincoln, and the title of the book is "And There Was Light." And one of the great quotes from Abraham Lincoln is, everything he was or ever hoped to be, he owed to his dear mother. So I can truly relate to that. My mom worked in home health care. I saw her tending to and ministering to elderly sick people, and from her I learned compassion. My dad worked with farmers most of his life in the agribusiness industry, and he had played Division I college football. So from him I learned grit and work ethic, and so and yet there were from a family of origin standpoint, there were mistakes that they made, and we all make mistakes as parents and as leaders, and that's how we grow and that's how we learn. So those are two big sources of influence. Then, as it relates to education, 2 teachers really in high school. Ken Lace taught pre-calc. I was not a fan of mathematics, but he made learning fun. And the crazy thing, Fred, is that he's still teaching today. I had him in 1987 at Fond du Lac Goodrich High School in my pre-calc class, and he's into his 50th plus year of teaching. He's in Elkhart Lake teaching probably right now as we speak, and he was my guest of honor this year at our Welcome Back convocation. Him and his wife came and talked about, why are you sticking with public education despite all the challenges and difficulties? The other leader was Larry Marciana, my high school wrestling coach, second generation Italian American from upstate New York, just tough and determined, and Probably my ability to be resilient through the examples I just shared came through being a high school wrestler and watching this 135-pound Italian-American guy never asked us to do anything he wouldn't do himself. I remember we lost to Green Bay Preble on a cold December night. We lost our last 3 matches when I was a sophomore, including myself. And the next day we came back to the wrestling room, and if there was ever a red flag in the wrestling room, that meant we were in trouble. We were going to wrestle live for 2 hours straight. And I remember us running steps outside the gymnastics area. All the lights were off. The custodians had gone home. There was only the one emergency light on, and we collapsed in a pool of sweat, and all you could hear was heavy breathing. And I remember Coach Marchionda saying, "We're never going to lose like that again." That haunts me in the best way, right? You can experience setback, and you can rebound. And frankly, it takes an ability to work hard and be resilient.
You know, Damian, you have... I've watched you for years, and I have seen that you retreat into yourself when the noise gets the loudest. You are a student of constant reading. You journal. You're constantly doing things in self-reflection. And yet there would be some who will say, well, self-reflection it's a squishy, kind of soft exercise. How have those disciplines served you in your leadership and therefore served all these kids that you've influenced?
Yeah, well, we're lifelong learners, right? We talk about that all the time with our kids, and yet, unfortunately, too many leaders don't model that. So one of the things I'm most proud of within the Howard-Suamico school system is we have committed to a culture of continuous improvement, and I have to be the chief learning leader, right? So I'm not just the chief reminding officer. I need to model the way when it comes to working with leaders like you here at InitiativeOne, when it comes to book studies. So every year we have a theme, for example. This year our theme is Dare to Lead. We stole that from Brene Brown in her book, and she talks about there's really 4 pillars of leadership to being a courageous leader. Even before that, I should backtrack and say within her subtitle, she talks about brave work, tough conversations, and whole hearts. That's the exact same thing that you guys are teaching here at InitiativeOne. And she talks about practices, courageous leadership practices, Fred, that are observable, teachable, and replicable. One of them is being a vulnerable leader, leading with vulnerability. You've been a great role model for me.
Thank you.
In that regard. I have seen very few leaders who have been willing to be as vulnerable as you've been in front of me and my team. And in fact, I remember one of those meetings you were in where you unpacked your story in front of my group. And honestly, I was thinking, I don't know if this was a good idea to bring you in because are you oversharing? And yet, frankly, that was endearing to our team because you weren't coming in as the unblemished expert. You were coming in as a leader with a limp who was courageous enough to put that on the table and say, here's who I am, here's who I'm about. If you can accept that, let's work together. My translation of what I heard you say. But in the moment, I was like, I'm not sure if this is what I signed up for. And yet, having seen you do that on a number of occasions has given me permission to grow in that area.
That's great. So, how has the influence of InitiativeOne, how has that impacted the district, the results, the leadership? Or is it one of those another, quote, training programs, it's a one-off, and six weeks later you're back to normal business? What kind of impact has it had upon your leadership journey?
Well, I think, first of all, the leader, the chief reminding officer, assumes responsibility for not only making the investment of time, energy, and money, but then finding ways to integrate the training, right, into an ongoing cycle of professional learning within our school system. So that's been my job. It's one thing to sign up for a training, to go through it and have a great intellectual experience. It's another thing for the leader to assume responsibility. So one of the things we've done is whenever we onboard a new leader, we send them through the training. So we've got a common framework, a common language, and this has been over a period of several years. So that's been invaluable for us. Probably the best way to answer your question, though, Fred, is through an anecdote. During COVID, which was intensely difficult for all of us as leaders, I remember being outside of our HR office, and my middle school principal was coming in, and I said, "Hey, Steve, how are you doing, really?" And, his response, I think, is telling. He said, "Damian, I'm doing remarkably well, and I've thought about the reason why, despite the intensity of COVID and everything that meant for us as a school system." He said, "I think the training and the development we've done with leaders like Fred and with companies like InitiativeOne has uniquely equipped us and prepared us." And my mantra to our team throughout COVID, Fred, is we're not going to lead by panic. We're going to lead by purpose. So to go through InitiativeOne, the Transform Leadership Training, to know that every one of my leaders has a 2-word purpose statement. And, when your why is big enough, right, you can deal with whatever, what, and how comes your way. So routinely throughout that 2-year period, I was talking with our team, and we were sharing strategies and ideas about how do we lead on purpose, come back to purpose, don't get distracted. And there was a lot of reasons to become distracted during that time. And one of the things I'm most gratified about was that we circled the wagons and we didn't start shooting in. Right? Our country did that in many ways. A lot of organizations did that. We circled the wagons and looked outward at, the real enemy, the true enemy, right? The virus, right? It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about masks. It wasn't about vaccinations. It was about having a sense of purpose based on our mission of working with kids and defending them. And I have to tell you, it was intensely hard. We had the first school system in the state of Wisconsin that lost a teacher to COVID. Her name was Heidi. So we were in the eye of the storm, and yet it was purpose and mission and focus that kept us moving forward, even in the face of all those obstacles.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. As we wrap this up, first of all, it's been such a treat to have you as my friend and colleague, and you've been a mentor to me as much as I've been a mentor to you, which is true partnership.
Thank you.
As people who are watching this and considering about bringing InitiativeOne into their organization, and they've been jaded by so many other experiences, anything that you would say to them from your own experience and the outcomes that you've seen?
Yeah, one of my good friends over my 18 years was Gary Marks, who passed away a few years ago. But he was a futurist and the author of 21 Trends in Education. And I'll close with this comment in response to your question, Fred. He said, great organizations are always trying to do 2 things. Great organizations and great individuals are always trying to get better, right? So they have a continuous improvement mindset, and they've got one eye on the future. So for those of you who are listening, either as individual leaders or as organizations, either in the public or the private sector, if you want to improve and you want to take another step toward the future, then I think InitiativeOne is a great place to start. Frankly, the way I did it is I scouted it myself. As a leader, I got involved. I was part of a small cohort. I was the only educator in a group of business leaders and went through the Transform Leadership Training. That told me if I'm going to ask my team to do this, I need to ensure that there's quality here, both for myself personally and I think for the team. And then we came on site and you did a half-day presentation called Qualities of World-Class Organizations.
I remember that.
So I had all of my key leaders in the room, 35 of them. At the end of that, I asked my team, is this the type and the quality of training and the quality of facilitation that we want to go through for an extended period of time? They voted on it.
Yes.
They said yes. So they had skin in the game, right? They had agency or ownership. And then it's just a matter of taking that step, making that investment. And we continue to benefit from it several years later. So I'm grateful for that.
Well, you can tell why I was so excited and pleased that Damian accepted our invitation to come and share some moments out of his very busy, demanding schedule. If you have any further questions and you want more information about the impact of our services, feel free to go to our website at InitiativeOne.com. We also offer a complimentary leadership seminar that we call Think Tanks. They're attended both virtually and people here personally. We have close to 800 to 900 who are participating in that every month. And so to do that, just go to our website and register for our monthly Think Tanks. Check us out. We hope to see you and to partner with you in the future. Take care. Bye-bye.